We are committed to maintaining and strengthening the lines of communication between us so that we avoid any miscommunications, any misperceptions, any miscalculations.
In our spotlight, Secretary of State Antony Blinken wrapping up his trip to China, where he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in a high-stakes meeting. Both men spoke for nearly an hour, working to make progress on critical issues, including China's support to Russia, tensions with Taiwan in the South China Sea, and global trade. This meeting comes as a potential U.S. ban looms over TikTok, which China opposes, but Secretary Blinken confirming the topic did not come up. So let's bring back my panel, Mike, Amanda, and John, and joining us, ABC News Elizabeth Schulze here in Washington, D.C. Okay, so Elizabeth, the last time Blinken was supposed to go to China, I was actually living in Beijing, and that got killed, well, postponed because of that spy balloon incident. So clearly relations have recovered from the lowest of lows, but what do you think was actually accomplished concretely on this visit?
Well, and it's a great point, Selena, because we're coming from a pretty low point here, but you heard it from Secretary Blinken. The point is to keep this line of communication open. The world's two biggest economies, the U.S. and China, need to try to have at least a little bit of stability in that relationship, according to Blinken. And what he said is they want to be able to have that communication going. And at the same time, there was a clear effort on the part of the U.S. to put pressure on China, specifically as it relates to China's support for Ukraine. We've seen China kind of try to play this role where it is not explicitly endorsing Russia, but it also hasn't taken the side that the U.S. wants it to and backing off of its support entirely. That's something that the U.S. is putting clear pressure on as a result of this visit. And, you know, of course, part of a broader effort by the Biden administration to try to keep this relationship open. We saw a couple weeks ago, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was in China. And, of course, as you point out, the meeting between President Biden and Xi last fall.
Yeah, this is clearly coming off the back of a flurry of high-level meetings. And John, Blinken urged Chinese leader Xi Jinping to cut back on China's support for Russia's defense industry. Blinken said that Russia would struggle to sustain its war in Ukraine without China's support. So do you think Blinken was successful in pressuring China on this?
Well, I think Blinken was successful because he got the meeting. And the reason I said it, I completely agree with Elizabeth's analysis. And what LBJ always said, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And I think basically China is an enemy. China does major cyber attacks against us. They're involved in major counter-espionage. They steal our trade secrets. And they're supporting people who are trying to harm the U.S., like Russia and Iran. So, you know, you got to talk to them. The only thing worse than having someone like that is someone like that you have no communication with, as who's a powerful person. So it's good that he talked to him. It's good that they had this discussion. It generally seemed respectful, and that can only help relations going forward.
Yeah, John, I take that point that it is a big win that they're even talking to each other. That is a big deal coming off of the very, very low point. And Mike, I just want to get your thoughts that TikTok didn't come up, but ByteDance has already said it has no plans to sell TikTok. You know, the Chinese government's not going to let go of this very easily, not to mention all the legal battles. I just want to get your take on how you see this potentially playing out.
I think that was actually good for Secretary Blinken not to engage on ByteDance and TikTok on this conversation because of the fact of what John just mentioned, the importance of being in regular communication with China from a strategic purposes is very key. We all know that China isn't pleased with our U.S. government engagement with TikTok and wanting it to divest. And so I think that would have interrupted the geopolitical diplomatic conversations that we need to be having right now on very important issues that are facing the globe as different allies are forming and different treaties are being re-examined. And so it's really important that they stayed away from that and focus on the bigger picture at hand.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no shortage of issues. TikTok is just one area of concern. But Amanda, I wanted to get some of the political implications of this. You know, the president has been very clear. He sees TikTok as a national security risk. But at the same time, his campaign is on the platform. And in a presidential election, to say that you're in support and that you signed into law legislation that could ban TikTok. I mean, do you think that's significant in an election year?
So I think he'll have a great way of both saying, hey, I'm on TikTok, I understand it, and I don't think we need to have China have all of our information. I actually think it gives him a way to talk about it. But I'll also say it was very important for him to be there, for him to be showing global power right now, not only politically, but for the administration going forward as we get deeper into the election, to say, hey, I'm going to continue to lead on foreign policy even as we go through an election cycle. That's really important for Biden to do throughout.
And Elizabeth, I know you've been covering this topic, and I've been covering TikTok for a long time, and some of the sources I talked to say it's going to be so hard to find a buyer just because of the price tag on this. This could be tens of billions. It could be 100 billion plus. You know, what's your take on the buyer acquisition route here?
Well, and I think it's really interesting that ByteDance came out overnight kind of breaking its silence and saying it's not for sale. But that was in response to this question of, could TikTok be sold to a buyer in the U.S. without the algorithm? The algorithm is really the crown jewel of the platform. Analysts who I talked to say that the company's valued at about $100 billion with the algorithm. Without it, it could be closer to $30 or $40 billion. And that's a much more palatable price tag for a company, whether it's a Microsoft or a Walmart. So the, of course, issue is you still want to acquire TikTok if it doesn't have the algorithm, a little bit less valuable, but still has 170 million users, still has a lot of data, people who are really engaged, a really hot demographic. So that is maybe a conversation that could start happening, even if ByteDance isn't saying it would right now, once we get through this kind of legal battle that'll play out over the next couple months.
That's really, really interesting, Elizabeth, because what is TikTok without the algorithm that makes it so addictive and sticky? Can they keep all those users if they don't have the algorithm? Anyways, thank you, Mike, Amanda, John, and Elizabeth, for the fascinating conversation.